Hey guys, Stephanie here with the Aeroponic Tower channel, and today I want to talk all things growing hydroponic squash on an aeroponic tower garden. And I like to call it hydroponic squash as well as aeroponics because I actually feel like this system is sort of a hybrid. So you can have hydroponics is when we're growing using water and minerals needed to feed the plants. So we're not growing in soil. Inside this tube is hollow, and with some hydroponic systems your food may be growing where water's being pumped in consistently, where it's flowing in and out. And then there's deep water systems where the roots are sitting in water that's not moving. And then you have aeroponics where water is sprayed with misters onto the roots at a certain time, so they're exposed to air, and then they're being misted with water, so they're getting the exact moisture sprayed in a mist right onto the roots. And then we have a drip system, which is what the tower gardens are, and there's water in the basin, 20 gallons in this flex unit, and it's pumped to the top with just a simple fountain pump, a 25 amp pump, and it goes into the top up here, what we call the shower curtain, and then it rains down and drips onto the roots. So that's why I call it sort of a hybrid. Yes, our roots are exposed to air, but we're not using the true aeroponic system of misting the roots. We're actually using a drip system to wet them and to keep water flowing on them in between being exposed to air. So just to clarify, that's why I call it both hydroponic and aeroponic. I chose these towers because you can grow an abundance of all sorts of varieties of food on here. So even with hydroponics or aeroponic systems, a lot of them are set up just to grow greens, or you need different systems to grow different types of vegetables. So in a true hydroponic system that is horizontal, you would need individual buckets to grow your squash. So it takes up more space, where with the towers I only need 3 square feet. I'm probably pushing that limit with these giant squash right here, but I only need about 3 square feet to grow greens, herbs, squash. This is a yellow squash, zucchini, peppers, tomatoes, all the things. And that means I'm not limited. I can replace the grocery store with a tower using the least amount of space. All right, I had to move to another tower because it's a food forest here. I had someone come over and she commented that she had never seen so much food growing in one space, and it is like a food forest. Everything is just exploding right now. Oh, we're gonna talk about that. Squash can make you a little bit itchy to the touch too, so if you're sensitive to it, make sure you're wearing gloves when you prune. I don't, but just kind of walking through here, it's making me a little bit itchy because there's so many squash growing. So I get the question quite a bit, people wanting to know where they should plant their squash on their aeroponic tower garden, meaning which grow port. And I want to address that today. I grow squash on the bottom, everywhere in between, all the way to the top. And originally I had some thoughts, and I used to grow them in a certain spot, and then as my towers just continued to evolve and I needed places to put things, I ended up putting squash in places that I never would have thought to do, and it's actually worked out really great as well. So I just wanted to show you guys the difference and some of the things I have found where there's a benefit to planting squash higher versus lower, or planting it lower on the tower versus higher up. So let's dive into some of the specifics. So I want to take you guys on a little tour first and show you all the squash I'm growing. I'm growing summer squash and winter squash on my towers, and they are in a variety of different places. I put some in places thinking they would be there temporary, and they ended up doing great, so I haven't moved them. I do hear different thoughts on nutrients and adding half nutrient solutions and not planting squash up top because the roots are really heavy feeders and then it doesn't leave any nutrients for anything below. I'm going to tell you guys, I'm not an expert in the field of the nutrients. I don't really care much about them other than they work really well. I love Tower Garden's formulation because it seems to grow everything that I want to grow really, really well. I don't do half solution. It's super, super hot here. In the summer, I just have found I don't need to. I don't do half solution when I'm starting small greens because I'm always starting small greens and young plants with larger plants. So I just kind of want to address that and address it from the perspective of I never want these to sound super overcomplicated. And sometimes when I get on forums, on Facebook groups, and I start reading, someone will ask for advice and I'll start seeing all of this stuff and it sounds really, really overwhelming, and people checking their pH like every day and really stressing about the pH. And my approach is not that. The goal here is to grow the most amount of food and to keep it as simple as possible. I have a tagline. I use simple, sustainable solutions for growing food in any space. And that's part of it. I just trust the nutrient solution. I put it in according to the back, no matter what time of year it is. I know common practice or best practice is when the tank is half full to fill it up. That way you don't have concentrated minerals. I guess it can throw off the minerals. There's a lot of talk about that. Honestly, most of the time my towers go until I hear the pump running on almost empty, and then I fill it back up and I add the right amount of nutrients and everything seems to grow. And I know that's not the case for everybody, and I know there can be problems, and I know I may have a problem eventually with one of these because there's too much nutrient sediment or whatever it may be. I will when the seasons change and a lot of these big things get pulled out and I'm starting in my winter gardens. I will dump out what's left in the tank and give it a good cleaning. So I do clean them maybe twice, sometimes 3 times a year, where I dump everything out and start over. But I just want to disclose that because although that might not always be the case, and you might end up where too much water evaporated and left too many nutrients, and you may need to deal with that. I just don't want these to ever be seen as super complicated and overthinking it, because I have also found that a lot of times the more people, there is a really crazy spider on my camera. He's like gold. Sorry. I see people fuss with these to the point of it no longer being fun and actually causing problems with their tanks, because they're then trying to get the pH perfect and maybe adding too much solution, and it swings it the other way because they didn't wait too long. This spider's really crazy. Before okay, he's gone. They didn't wait long enough to check the pH, and then you start adding all these extra things, and I don't know. I just wanted to disclose that. So is my advice expert advice from someone who really understands the nutrient blend and the science behind it and does everything perfectly formulated for the ideal nutrients. That is not me. I just grow a ton of food and I don't think a lot about it, and I actually rarely check my pH even after I add my nutrients, just because I'm used to doing it and I kind of know where my pH lands after I add my nutrients. So yes, I just wanted to disclose that. I believe in keeping it simple. I don't think if you stick a squash on the top or the bottom, it really makes that much of a difference. There are just some things I have found with each one that are beneficial and where they might struggle a little bit. So I want to talk about those things. All right, so let's take a tour of the squash that I'm growing, and I'm going to talk about each tower individually and kind of my thoughts on planting on the bottom versus the middle versus some that I even have on the top. So over here I have a zucchini, and I will tell you, this is the most mature, oldest zucchini I've ever grown in my life. I have 2 of them on the tower that have been on here since before our last frost. They've been producing fruit since before our last frost, because I was able to start them on the tower and bring them out earlier than you can ever plant in the garden. And that's a newer, younger plant, and these just have continued to thrive, so I haven't replaced them. I'm getting to the point where I think it's smart to do so, because these have gigantic roots which take up more minerals and more nutrients. But I've just been experimenting a little, and squash can take a while to get going, and I didn't have any others fruiting, so I didn't want to remove them until I had some younger zucchinis starting to fruit, which I do now, so that can help me make up my mind if it's time to pull this zucchini out, just for the sake of using less water and less nutrients. I'm not going to do it over the next couple of weeks because we're busy. This is a cocazelle, and I don't have any other cocazelle that are young yet. So this plant, and let's see if we can take a look. This is where the stem starts, and there's a tomato in here wanting to take over the world. There we go. Okay. So here's the stem. And when I was growing it initially, it looked like this, right? Oh, here's a squash bug. This is how we deal with pests. This pest right here is the only one I've really struggled with this year. And they're only a problem when they hatch. They're actually not destructive until they have, until the eggs hatch. It's the little squash bugs that cause all the problems. Here we have this stem, and it's been growing and fruiting, and I've been cutting off the leaves. I keep my squash pretty heavily pruned, and I have a video about that. And it goes all the way down to the ground, and it's still fruiting. Now, a couple of things with this. If you see people who are vertical growing squash, this is what they're doing, but instead of trailing it down, they're trailing it up and trellising it. And knowing that I can keep zucchini alive this long, I am leaning towards planting them up higher in the future, like the top row, and letting it trail down, because this stem doesn't take up any space. It's thin, it's strong, it can hold itself up, and that just allows for more space and gets this off the ground. So what I have found with the zucchini that are closer to the ground is they are being attacked a little bit more by the squash bugs, which we just saw, and I'm finding more eggs on these lower ones. So there's some eggs right there. And my plants closer to the top have some, but not as many as I've been finding here. Now, because I keep these super pruned back and nice and cleaned up, it's easy to see when there's pests or there's eggs, but I definitely have found more eggs. Here's some right here on these squash that are close to the bottom. Now, when you see this, you just get rid of them. So I've been able to keep this zucchini alive a couple of ways. I have found a way to treat powdery mildew, which we're very prone to here. And I've just kept them groomed, and I've caught the pests, the squash bugs, very early on. We also don't get vine borers on the towers for some reason. I don't know why. I would get the vine borers all the time on my tower, on my zucchini in the garden, but we just don't get the vine borer. So between heavily pruning off leaves and letting airflow, looking for the eggs and the squash bugs, these zucchini just keep going and going. And here is another very, very mature zucchini that has had quite some time to grow and has produced an enormous amount of food. I'm actually going to pull this one out tonight because there's not a lot of grapefruit coming. This is again the cocazelle, and I have two others doing really well, and I have some new starts ready to go, so I'm going to replace this one tonight. But you can see just how long it's been able to produce food for us. I mean, I can't even tell you, I can't even remember how many zucchini we've gotten off of there, but quite a lot. So over here we have more eggs on there, and this is the season. They are everywhere. I'm having to check every couple of days for powdery mildew. This is actually a cucumber, and for eggs, because the pest pressure is heavy right now. We are in the thick of summer, and so there's some eggs on this one. But keeping your plants nice and pruned, it's easy to see them, and then I can just go collect all of these. So when I get done recording, I will go through, do a nice cleanup, make sure I've gotten all of those. All right, and then you can see I have younger plants in here, and I'm just checking. I just go through. Some of these leaves need to be thinned out. I don't like it when they're touching like this. So I did a video on pruning, but I will cut some of those. And I just look for squash bugs and I look for the eggs, but I have noticed I find less on these plants that are a little bit higher. So these sort of sit in the middle. I don't even know what kind of squash. This looks like another zucchini. But let me show you another squash over here. I have some cucumber that are pretty spent and we're about to head out of town. So I'm not going to worry about those until I get back. But here I have a cocazelle squash. And this is a vining plant, and it is, you can see there's a cocazelle right there. It makes these giant trumpet-shaped squash. Here's some of my starts that I'm gonna replace some of the older plants with. And it's a vining plant, so you really need somewhere for it to vine and to grow. So things like this, you can put them on the top and let them fall down the tower. So you can plant it up here and just kind of drape it down, which gives it more space to trellis down. Or with these, I just put them on the bottom row and I'm letting it grow on the rocks because I don't have a trellising system, and that works just fine. You can grow winter squash, summer squash. So I have yellow squash, several varieties of zucchini. Here's another very mature zucchini. This is actually one of my favorite plants. Watch, this one I planted in the middle of the tower and it's trailed down. I paired it with a nasturtium, and nasturtium attracts pests, and that keeps some of the pests off of other things. And this one goes all the way down where it's still providing us with that cocazelle. So I need to come up here, and there's an old leaf, clean off some of this and just give it a nice little haircut. Look for any eggs. I don't see anything, but this one has been going strong. All right, this tower here, I put some squash on the bottom. It's either a delicado or a spaghetti squash. I've got a yellow squash towards the middle here, and then along the midsection we have more yellow squash, and these are doing great in the middle of the tower. For one, we can see the fruit. It's like right here in your face, so you're not going to miss it, which is really great. I can get eyes on these leaves really easily and see if there's any pest pressure, any eggs, any disease. Like this one has some powdery mildew, and look, that's a bad guy. So we'll clean that up in a minute. And it makes it easier to manage these. I don't have to go digging in the leaves like I do the ones on the ground. And you know, it is very itchy to touch the leaves. I'm very itchy right now just from walking through these. So I like them in the middle to the top for this reason. I also like that there's a canopy, so you can see these huge massive leaves have made these umbrellas, and they're taking in all the sun, and they're also providing some shade for things like my kale. So even though we want to be full sun, sometimes having a little filter in these really hot summer days is very beneficial to all the other plants. So I'm liking this. I've been keeping it thinned out. If you grew this squash in the middle here, one of these with these big broad leaves, I forget what variety this is. I think this is a straight neck. Early Prolific is the name. I'm pretty sure, could be wrong there. But because it has all these giant leaves, if I didn't prune this, it would be a problem. But because I come in here every couple of days and I prune it, these become a blessing to the other plants. They provide a little protection, and then this one's just thriving, and it's so much fun to walk around and just see squash dripping from this tower like that. So I really like the placement of that one. There's also one on the top here, and I don't see any of the other plants not thriving because this one's taking all the nutrients. That's kind of one of the thoughts, is if you put something big up here, it'll suck up all the nutrients. I actually don't find that to be the case. I've put lettuce on top and things that don't take a lot of water and nutrients, and I've put really heavy feeders like peppers and eggplants and tomatoes on top, and I just don't see a difference. They all seem to get the right amount of water all the way down, and everything thrives and does amazing. But you know, again, use your best judgment on that. I just keep it simple, and I do like to experiment and kind of make note of what I liked about growing food in certain spots. I don't like having to bend down and manage zucchini on the floor. I don't like when I turn my towers, I'm dragging my zucchini plants. So I do like the idea of planting the squash, especially things like zucchini that may be on the tower for a really long time, to be able to trail down through this tower. I love these squash up here because they're just creating such a beautiful canopy for the other plants, and the squash is thriving. The pest pressure is definitely lower up here. Then interval planting. So one of the main things I do with squash is make sure to always be planting it, because we never know what's going to happen. Sometimes they get too big, like I have some. Sometimes they just get attacked and die. There's some little eggs on here. So I have some baby plants. I'm starting this one in the middle. There's one right here. We just want to come check them for any issues. I have one tucked down towards the bottom here because that was the only space available, and I'm trying to keep the leaves of the tomatoes trimmed up so that this one can get the right amount of light. And then here is another one that's been in for quite some time. This stem is looking really old. I don't know if you guys can see that, but it's amazing. It's still just doing fine, even looking so ratty. The fruit, the zucchini coming off of these is still amazing, and that's why I haven't pulled them yet, because they are just producing so much food. I hate to take it out. All right, guys, so that is my answer. I think you can plant them up top, and there's benefit if you want to plant some things that need a little bit more shade, like greens for juicing, arugula, cilantro, things that need a little bit more protection. These leaves offer a gorgeous canopy if you plant them up high. I feel like you're gonna get a little bit more squash up high because all of that sun is being absorbed into the leaves. So I've noticed these are producing amazing fruit. I have found anytime I plant things on the top row or the top 2 rows, they produce bigger fruit and more abundance. Whether it's lettuce, I can get a lettuce head in the middle this big, I can get a butterhead lettuce on the top this big, because it gets so much more sun exposure. So that's something to be mindful of. If you want to grow a bunch of yellow squash, put them up high. Zucchini is going to start to trail down as it grows, so it's going to end up towards the bottom anyway, but that gives you space for it to trail, so you can plant them in the middle so it's easy to harvest. And my philosophy is have fun with this. Keep it simple. Don't overthink it. It's not a perfect science. We can plant these, keep an eye on them. If something does terrible or you hate it up top, next time plant it on the bottom. I will say is with the plants that are towards the bottom, the roots can grow into the tank, and that changes them from an aeroponic system into a deep water culture. Some of mine I've left because the roots have gotten so big that I don't want to cut them. I just want to pull those plants out and replace them. It would harm the plants too much to pull them out, some of those older mature plants. So I will just pull those whole systems out. It's not true aeroponics for that plant at that point, and it can use more water and minerals. So I also like the idea of these up top, because these are going to get big root systems, but there is no way those roots are going to make it all the way into the bottom of the tank. There is no right or wrong way. The only wrong way is to not plant squash and to not grow. So definitely plant some squash seeds. I am about to start new seeds that'll get us through the fall, and then actually some that will put us all the way into the winter, because I want to have mature plants when I move the towers into the garage that are already ready to fruit, which will hold us through the winter. I move our towers into the garage and have a small heater on those so that I can continue to grow food year round. The least expensive price I have seen for zucchini and squash this year over the last 3 months is 89 cents per squash. So this is saving us a ton of money. It's providing us better than organic food, clean, fresh. I have meals I can make every day of the week. Just have fun with it. Stay on top of your pruning. Stay on top of your pest management by just putting eyes and removing any squash bugs or any eggs you see. Oh, I'm about to harvest some of this squash and make some homemade vegetarian pizzas loaded with all the veggies that are coming out of this garden. I'll see you on the next video.